Welcome to the source of commercial real estate, where we talk to the experts in non residential commercial real estate so you can grow your business, find a competitive advantage, and use real estate to live the life that you want. I am your host, Jonathan Hayek, and today I am talking with well known real estate investor Jay Scott with Bar Down Investments. Jay Scott is an entrepreneur, investor, advisor, author, and partner at Bar Down Investments, focused on buying and repositioning large multifamily properties. In the past 14 years, Jay has bought, built, rehabbed, sold, lent on, and held over $150 million in property all over the country. Jay holds strategic advisor roles in several companies and is the author of 5 BiggerPockets books on real estate investing, including the best-selling The Book on Flipping Houses. Find out more about Jay and connect with him at connectwithjayscott.com. Listeners, you are undoubtedly familiar with Jay Scott. I am thrilled to have him with me here today. Jay, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Jonathan. Thrilled to be here.
Of course. I am really looking forward to this conversation. For anyone that is not familiar with your story, why don't we start out with you sharing about your background, how you got started in real estate, and what your work looks like today?
Yeah. So I am an engineer and business guy by education and former career. Have an electrical engineering degree, an MBA, and I spent most of my career in the tech world, in Silicon Valley, working for companies like Microsoft and eBay. In 2008, my wife, who is also in the tech world, we decided to get married, and neither of us really wanted to continue to live that lifestyle of traveling 3 or 4 weeks a month, working 80-hour weeks, not being able to focus on our family. We really wanted to do the consummate lifestyle, put family over work sort of thing. And so within a couple of weeks of deciding to get married, we both decided to quit our jobs, move from the West Coast back to the East Coast, and then figure something else out. We didn't know what that something else was going to be at the time. But the summer before we got married, we decided to flip a house, and that turned to 2 and 5 and 10 and 50 and a couple hundred. And so I guess before we knew it, we were house flippers and we were real estate people. And we did that for about 10 years. And then in 2018, we kind of got burned out on house flipping, and I made the transition to multifamily syndication. So buying and repositioning large multifamily apartment complexes, and found a partner in Ashley Wilson, and we currently manage Bar Down Investments together.
Jay, thanks so much for going over your background. You are well known in the real estate world for people like me that have grown up in real estate through BiggerPockets, so to speak. You're well known, you're a household name, and you're well known for sharing your thoughts and your insight on the economy and the current investing climate and environment. So I'd love to start off just by getting your thoughts on where we are in October 2023 in the commercial real estate investing world.
Well, I think we need to be more specific than October 2023. It's like October 19th, because yesterday was different. Tomorrow's likely to be different. It's crazy. Things are changing quickly. But if you were to ask me like what the general perception is of the economy and the market, my best answer is I have no idea. We're in a very weird place right now. And it's funny, I've been doing this for 15 years and I've been tracking the economy and investing for the better part of 25 or 30 years. And it's really the first time. And when I say the first time, I mean the last couple years since COVID. We've seen a lot of this. It's the first time that I think everybody's stumped on what's going on in the economy, why what we're seeing is happening, and where things are likely headed. That said, I guess a couple of the big trends are that inflation is still an unknown quantity right now. So we saw peak inflation last summer, 2022. And over the past year, the Fed has started raising interest rates to get inflation under control. They've done a seemingly good job of that. They got inflation from a peak of about 9.1% last July down to, as of about a month ago, somewhere around 3.1, 3.2%. We've popped back up to about 3.7%. So in the scheme of things, I mean, compared to where we were last year, things are looking much better. But 3.7%, 4%, 3.5%, whatever the number is right now, if you can even believe the government's numbers on inflation, is still exceedingly high. It basically means that the cost of everyday goods are compounding at a 4% rate, which is pretty fast. It's going to make it very difficult if wages don't keep up for the average consumer, and especially for the average real estate investor, to continue to make financial inroads over the next couple of years. So I think we're likely in the next couple of months to see one of a few things happening. We're either going to see the economy start to break, which I think is what the Fed is hoping for. We're going to see some softening in jobs. We're going to see some softening in the business sector, and ultimately that's going to result in layoffs and bankruptcies and personal debt issues. And at the end of the day, I think that'll fix inflation. Or we're not going to see that, and the Fed's going to have to continue to take action over the next 6 to 12 months, like most likely pushing up interest rates even higher to really combat inflation and get the system to break in order to get things back under control.
Thanks for that great summary. Yeah, the I think the phrase of the month right now is higher for longer. There were some real optimists, 6 to 12 months ago that were projecting lower interest rates by the end of 2023. That is 100% not going to happen. And at this point, we're going to be extremely lucky if we see it by the end of 2024. We've been talking about, a potential recession and potential reduced wages and job losses for really the last 18 months, and we really haven't seen anything significant. Are you as surprised as a lot of other people are that we are where we are?
I'm a little surprised, and certainly if you would have asked me a year and a half ago, I wasn't smart enough to predict what would happen. That said, and I think a lot of us are in this boat now that we've seen what's happened over the last year and a half, in retrospect, it's made sense. It was a path that, again, difficult to predict, but in retrospect, I think we can tell a story around it. And I think what we're seeing right now, and if you really dig into the data, I know everybody's saying jobs are still really strong and inflation's coming down, and it looks like, for the most part, the economic indicators are kind of swinging in our favor. Everything's looking better. But if you really look at the data, what you'll see is that there are some things that are pretty concerning. And I think there's a reasonable shot in the next 3 to 6 months that we do see some considerable softening in the employment sector. The biggest concern that I have right now is around businesses. And when we talk about the economy, everybody thinks about kind of the consumer perspective on the economy. And they think, okay, if things are getting more expensive, if people can't buy houses, if they can't afford food, if they can't afford gas, if they're losing their jobs, that's what breaks the economy. In reality, if you look at a historical view and a more kind of 10 to 20,000 foot view of the economy, what happens to consumers is a lagging indicator. Consumers start to suffer after we've already seen indication that the economic environment is softening, and that's typically led by businesses. If you want to know what's going to happen in the economy over the next 6 to 12 to 24 months, look at where businesses are right now. And what we're starting to see is that while business income is still pretty strong, and again, this relates a lot to inflation. Prices are up, and so people don't need to buy as much stuff, and they're still spending more money. If you look at, for example, the retail sales numbers that came out earlier this week, what we saw is that consumers are spending a ridiculous amount of money right now. So from that perspective, businesses are doing actually pretty well. But if you look at the other side, not the income side, but more the expense and the debt side, what we're seeing is a completely different story. Businesses are starting to run up against the expiration of a lot of short-term debt that they took out a couple years ago. And when I talk about businesses in this regard, I'm talking more not about the big public companies, the S&P 500s. Those big companies tend to get long-term fixed rate debt, so they're not as threatened by interest rate changes and credit crunches and things like that. But I'm talking about the smaller businesses, the mom and pop businesses, the tech industry, the mid-sized businesses, the businesses that people like us run. and even up to like million and 10 million and $100 million businesses, we're starting to get into a situation where I have a feeling over the next 6 to 12 months there's going to be a major issue specifically around debt. And what I mean is that a lot of these businesses rely on debt that's 2 years long, 3 years long, 4 years long in term. So they need to refinance or recapitalize this debt every few years. A lot of that debt was taken out at 0% interest rates or 2% interest rates 2, 3, 4 years ago. And so a lot of that debt, and when we talk about a lot, what I'm in actual numbers, we're talking about over $1 trillion in the next year and over $2 trillion by the end of 2025. Over $2 trillion of that debt is going to come due in the next 2 years. Companies are going to still need this money to continue to operate, which means they're going to have to refinance those loans, or they're going to have to get new loans. Well, those loans were at, again, 0%, 2%, 3, 4, 5% interest. They're now going to have to get new loans or refinance those loans at 7, 8, 9, 10, 12% interest, which means that businesses are going to have a lot of difficulty continuing to operate in the same manner that they have been for the last few years. They're not going to be able to buy as much equipment. They're not going to be able to buy as much inventory. They're not going to be able to build new factories. They're not going to be able to hire more employees or give pay raises. And I suspect that there are going to be a lot of businesses that find that they can't do any of that, that they can't even continue to operate without working capital at much lower interest rates. And I have a feeling that in the next 6 to 12 months, we're going to see a lot of corporate debt defaults. We're going to see a lot of bankruptcies in the corporate space. We're going to see a lot of layoffs because businesses are going out of business. And I think that is going to kind of be the culmination of everything that the Fed has done over the last year and a half in raising interest rates. And I think that's when the system's going to break, and we're going to start to see a drop in interest rates when the Fed has to reverse course.
Jay, it will certainly be interesting to see what happens with debt and specifically with commercial real estate. For about the last 6 months, a lot of people have been predicting blood in the commercial real estate world, really starting about now. And famously, at the Best Ever conference back in March, Neil Bawa got up on stage and projected blood in the streets, really starting October 2023 and continuing on for the next 12 months, say. So I'd love to get your perspective from what you're seeing in the multifamily world. I assume that's really where you're focused and where your energy is focused. Are you starting to see any distress coming from debt coming due?
Yeah. So, I mean, I can certainly talk about multifamily. I can talk a little bit about commercial in general. It is important to recognize that when we talk about commercial real estate, we're not talking about a single entity. It's not a monolithic thing. What happens in multifamily is going to be very different than what happens in office or retail, or flex space or industrial or self-storage or assisted living or any other number of pieces of that thing we call commercial real estate. And so we have to look at each of these kind of in its own vacuum. And certainly if you look at something like office, we know that office is struggling to some extent. I don't think it's as bad as a lot of people think. I think actually the biggest risk to office, and some of your listeners might be interested in this, is that office for the most part constitutes about $1 trillion of the total $5 trillion in commercial debt. And so if you think of typical loan being 7 years in length, that means that about 15% of that $1 trillion comes due in any given year in office. So about $150 billion per year in office, which is a lot of money. But to put that into perspective, if we think back to earlier this year when the Silicon Valley Bank collapsed, Silicon Valley Bank was worth $200 billion. So the entire office market of debt is currently worth less than what the Silicon Valley Bank was in a given year. Sorry, no, the entire office debt in a given year that comes due is less than a Silicon Valley Bank. So it is a big number. Don't get me wrong, $150 trillion is a big number, but it's probably not something that would destroy the economy on its own. The issue with something like office, where loan to values are actually pretty low, average of about 43%. So even if there were a major issue with office, a lot of office owners would be okay because they don't have a ton of debt. The problem is that when you look at the debt space for things outside of multifamily, we're not typically talking about long-term fixed interest rates, non-recourse through Fannie and Freddie. We're talking about more one-off type bank loans where the banks often need more than just a personal guarantee and the collateral of the asset in order to give the loan. And so oftentimes office owners will take other assets they own, very commonly that's multifamily, and they'll collateralize their office loans with their multifamily properties as well. So the bigger risk I see to something like office that everybody's talking about isn't so much that we get lots of defaults on office space, but that these defaults on office space kind of flow into the multifamily world because these loans are collateralized with multifamily as well. And so I think that's the big risk to this broader thing called commercial, and specifically in the multifamily world. Now, that said, multifamily is experiencing its own issues as well. There are three things that I've seen in multifamily over the last year or so. Number one, we have a lot of multifamily debt that's floating interest rates that don't have these things called rate caps. Rate caps are basically these insurance policies that ensure that multifamily owners, if interest rates go up, they don't have to pay ridiculous insurance or interest premiums. Basically, the insurance policy covers the additional interest if rates go too high. But there are some banks out there that will give floating rate loans without these insurance policies, which means multifamily owners who bought properties 2-3 years ago at 3%, 4% interest rates are now paying 7, 8, 9% interest rates, and they can no longer service that debt. They can't pay their mortgage every month. If they can pay their mortgage every month, well, they're probably having trouble paying other expenses. And if they can pay those other expenses, they're probably not paying their investors. So that's risk number one, just increase in interest rates. Risk number two is a lot of these floating rate loans are short term, which means every 2, 3, 4, 5 years, they need to be refinanced. Now, historically, that hasn't been a problem because values go up, you refinance, even if it's a higher interest rate, you can refinance. The problem is when values go down and you have to refinance, you can't refinance out the entire debt amount that you currently owe. So let's say you have a loan for $10 million, property drops 20, 25% in value. Now you need to get a new loan, but the bank says, I'm only willing to give you $8 million to refinance, but you're paying off a $10 million loan. That $2 million difference has to come from somewhere. And so in a lot of cases these days, that's coming from investors. We're seeing capital calls where operators are going to their investors and saying, we need couple $1 million to go and refinance. The third place is that insurance policy that I was talking about, those rate caps. And what we're seeing with those, even the deals that have that insurance policy that don't need to worry about interest rates going up, these insurance policies typically last 1, 2, or 3 years. When these policies expire, bank requires us to buy new policies. These policies, for the most part, cost $20,000, $30,000, $50,000 a couple years ago per year. Now we're seeing these policy rates at $400,000, $500,000, $800,000 per year. To use a concrete example, we have a property that we bought 3 years ago. We bought this rate cap insurance policy at $30,000 a year back in 2020. It just renewed last week after 3 years, and we had to pay now $480,000 per year. So that's a difference of $450,000 per year. Luckily, our property has been doing very well over the last few years. We were ready for this increase, so we're in okay shape. But there are a lot of operators out there that aren't prepared to be paying an extra $400,000 or $500,000 or $600,000 per year for this insurance policy, and that's what's getting them in trouble. And so those are the three big things that we're seeing. That third thing, that rate cap insurance policy, has honestly been the biggest issue that we've seen for a lot of multifamily operators over the last couple months. We've started to see a lot of distress in our markets. And when I say a lot, I'm not talking about 2008 type levels, but compared to what we've seen since 2012 or 2013, we're seeing a lot of operators who are waiting to the last minute to see if interest rates come down because they don't want to sell the property. They'd rather refinance or buy a new rate cap. But they're waiting to the last minute. They're seeing that interest rates aren't coming down on the schedule that they were hoping that they would, and suddenly now they're desperate to sell, with the bank threatening to take back the property. So we have a lot of owners that are coming to us directly saying, "Hey, can you help us out?" We run a fund that kind of helps distressed owners. So we have a lot of folks coming to us asking if we can help them out. And what we're finding is that a lot of these multifamily owners are waiting too long to take any action, and by the time they start to look for relief, by the time they start to look for help, they're way too far gone, and probably won't be able to avoid the bank coming after them. And so I think that's been the biggest risk in multifamily, is that a lot of operators knew that there was a year or two runway as of a year ago, and were just crossing their fingers and hoping that interest rates would come down by the time they had to face the music. And what they're seeing is that interest rates just didn't come down on that aggressive schedule that a lot of us were hoping. And so they find that they've waited too long, and now they're in trouble.
Thank you for all that. Really love hearing all that insight. I have a specific question about that example that you gave. So you had to renew your rate cap for $480,000. This may be a totally naive question, but if an operator like yourself were to make a calculated risk and say, I don't think interest rates are going any higher, so we're going to choose not to purchase another rate cap. Is that a ridiculous idea? Is that risky? Are people making those decisions, or are these rate caps required by the lenders?
Yeah, it's actually the last thing you said. So for many lenders, specifically the large ones, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, the conventional agency lenders, these rate caps are required, and so we don't have the option of taking that risk of rates not continuing to go up, because the lenders don't want to take that risk. They require those insurance policies in place, because they want to know that their capital is covered, is preserved.
Makes a lot of sense. So, Jay, I'm going to assume that Bar Down Investments is preparing and wants to take advantage of potential distress that is coming down the line over the next 12 months. What is Bar Down Investments doing? And what do you suggest others be doing right now to prepare for the potential distress coming?
Yeah. So what I recommend to all operators, and if you're an investor, to think about from the operators you're investing in, is that the economy works in cycles. Real estate works in cycles. We go up, we go down, we go up, we go down. As long as your time horizon is long enough, and as long as you're not at risk of losing your property during the down times, not any deal, most deals are going to do well long term. So if I buy a deal today, if I bought a deal a year and a half ago, literally the top of the market, I'm not too concerned as long as I can survive long enough to get to the next top of the market, which is likely to be 3, 5, 7 years from now. I mean, if you look at economic cycles, if you look at real estate cycles, typically, historically, we're looking at a 5 to 7 year time horizon, between peak to peak, trough to trough. And so in theory, if you bought at the top of the market 2 years ago, assuming you're not at risk of losing that property at any point in the next 7 years, you're probably going to be in a position where you can make money on that property. And so if you can do that at buying at the worst time, the top of the market, you certainly should be able to do that buying now, which is after the market's already gone down 20, 25% in most places. And so what I tell people is, whether you're buying or whether you're investing in a deal, the biggest questions you should be asking are around those worst case scenarios. If interest rates continue to go up, if the economy starts to soften, if your local market experiences some major downturn due to weather conditions or due to economic conditions, did your operator, or are you as an operator buying that property correctly, such that you can withstand that risk, you can survive for the next 5, 7, 10 years until we get through this part of the cycle, back to the top of the cycle again in the next cycle or the next part of the cycle, and can sell for a profit. And so from our perspective, any deal that we're looking at right now, we're thinking about, can we withstand any future headwinds related to what's currently going on in the economy or what might go on in the economy in the future? And assuming we're confident that we're buying right with the right type of loan, we're conservative on our numbers, we're conservative on our cap rate or exit cap rate, we're conservative on everything we do, our expense increase, our insurance increases, our property tax increases, our rent growth estimations. As long as we're conservative on everything and we're confident that we're not going to be in a position where we're going to lose this property in the meantime, we're confident that, again, over 5, 7, 10 years, we're going to make a good profit.
Makes a lot of sense. Jay, I want to pivot now to the J. Scott brand. Your name is ubiquitous in the real estate world. You have thousands of posts on the BiggerPockets forums. You've published several books with BiggerPockets, and the J. Scott name and the J. Scott brand has become household in the real estate world. So I want to ask you a little bit about building that J. Scott brand. When you started posting on BiggerPockets, maybe 10 years ago or whatever, did you have an idea of the trajectory of what you were trying to do with the J. Scott brand? Or can you talk me through a little bit about how you've built your brand to what it is today?
So to be completely honest, I went in without any concept that I was building a brand. And in fact, it wasn't until a year to 3 years ago when I started to seriously start raising capital that I even started to think about my brand. I just didn't care because none of what I did was in order to make money. And so because I wasn't looking to make money, and now again, as a capital raiser, having a brand is extremely important and has been beneficial for me. But there's been very little direct revenue from my brand over the past 15 years. And because of that, I've put very little thought into how I've built it. It came naturally, and I guess I did the right things. I'm sure there are lessons to be learned there, and I've thought a little bit about this, and I can pull out a few of the lessons, but I certainly didn't go in with a plan. My personality is I like to teach. I like to give back. And when I started investing in 2008, I went on to BiggerPockets. I had never bought a house before in my life until 2008. I was 37 years old. And so I said, I want to flip a house. And I said, to keep me accountable, I'm going to keep kind of a diary on house flipping. And so I started a thread on BiggerPockets about flipping houses after I had read lots of stuff on BiggerPockets to learn. I started a blog called 123 Flip, which I think is still out there somewhere. And I said, I'm just going to keep a diary. Hopefully it'll keep me accountable. Hopefully if anybody reads it, it'll help them learn about the mistakes I'm making. And more importantly, they could see the real numbers. Because back in 2008, there were all these house flipping TV shows and none of them were using real numbers. You'd say, we bought it for 100, we sold it for 200, we made $100,000. Obviously, that's not the case. And so I wanted to kind of put the real numbers out there. So I started this blog, and every day I would post pictures and stories and things I had learned. I'd post all the numbers down to the penny of what we were spending and how much money we were making, and what we're buying these properties for. And we did that for the first 50 deals. And because back then, I think we were the first blog to really go into that level of detail, people really took notice. They loved it. They loved seeing the real life stories. They loved seeing all the bad to come with the good. They loved seeing our first deal that we basically overpaid for, took too long to renovate, spent too much on renovations, couldn't sell, had to lease out. Tenants destroyed the house and left in the middle of the night. We had to do another rehab. And long story short, it was a 4-year deal that we made like $3,000 on. And people love that. They love seeing the reality of what was going on. And so that kind of built up a following. In 2013, I started getting lots of attention from people that wanted to take me to lunch, that wanted to grab coffee, that wanted to ask me questions, phone calls, emails. And I'm an introvert. And it's really hard for me to like have lots of in-depth one-on-one conversations. I love to write. I love to teach through my writing. But having conversations with people is difficult. So my wife said, all these people they don't care about you. They just want your information. So why don't you take all the stuff you put on the blog that you put on BiggerPockets and just put it in a book? And I said, that's not a bad idea. And so I wrote the book on flipping houses. One chapter out of that book was a chapter on how to estimate rehab costs. It ended up being a 300-page chapter. So I said, okay, I'm going to turn that into a second book. And so the same day, March 8th, I think, 2013, I released those two books. The book on flipping houses, the book on estimating rehab costs. I was friends with the CEO of BiggerPockets by that time, and he agreed to kind of publish the books for me. He put his brand on it. He sold it on the website, and he helped market them. And unexpectedly, the book took off. It became like the number one selling book in the real estate category on Amazon. We sold hundreds of thousands of copies, and I somehow became a household name. And despite the fact that I wrote that book to try and avoid the spotlight and having to talk to lots of people, it kind of served the opposite. And so I think that was where things started to take off. And again, I wasn't trying to build anything. It just was natural. People started to ask me to speak at conferences. So I started speaking at conferences. I ended up doing the BiggerPockets podcast episode number 10, and that became like the biggest real estate podcast on the planet. So being episode number 10, a lot of people have listened to that over the last 10 years. I wrote a few more books. And so again, my goal has always just been to give back and to teach and to convey information and to help other people kind of get started on their journey. And it wasn't until a few years ago that I even sat down and thought, I have this brand now. I really should try and leverage it to raise capital. And so for more than a decade, it really was just a desire to give back and to help others. And so my best lessons there are, if you want to build a brand, start with that in mind. Start with the idea that you're giving unconditionally. And at some point you can ask for something in return, but always give more value than you ask. And I think for me, that's kind of what's helped. There are a lot of people that were excited to invest with me, literally for the reason that, and this, I got this feedback hundreds of times. You've given so much over the last 15 years. You've never asked for anything in return. What can we do to help?
Yeah, that is such a powerful story. And I mean, my biggest takeaway from what you just said is be genuine. You're clearly a genuine person. You don't have a stage behind you. You're not, you don't pretend to be someone that you're not, and provide value. And in 2008, when you started posting on BiggerPockets, the idea of becoming an influencer was probably not on anybody's radar. Of being an Instagram, I don't even know if Instagram was around in 2008, probably was, but it wasn't on people's radars to build a brand on Instagram or LinkedIn or anything else. And so it seems like you started the right way by you mentioned accountability. I think that's really interesting, and providing value with that blog of detailing your first 50 flips, of providing providing the numbers and what's going well, what's going wrong. And we've had this deal for 4 years. I've rehabbed it twice and we've made $3,000 on it. I mean, people love that stuff. But on the other hand, what I'm torn about is people also seem to, I don't know if they love it or they're attracted to the flashy stuff on Instagram and LinkedIn and podcasts and that kind of stuff. That's not you. And I think that's awesome. So, I mean, looking back on it, would you have done it any other way, or are you making any different choices now, seeing some of that flashy stuff and seeing people have stages for Instagram and video podcasts? Would you do anything differently?
Yeah. So in retrospect, I don't think I could have done it any other way. And I think I speak for a lot of people in that trying to be somebody different than you are. And I've tried. I'm not going to say I've done stupid stuff. Like a couple of years ago, everybody was like, you gotta start doing the YouTube videos and heavy editing and scripted. And I tried. And it's not me. And if you're going to try and do something that doesn't match your personality, if it doesn't match your skill set, I think for most of us, 99% of us, it's not going to stick. we're not going to be able to keep it up. And building a brand is really about long-term repetition. It's about staying power. And I started in 2008, but I mean, nobody knew who I was until 2013 when I wrote those books, and it's only grown since then. And I go to conferences, and a lot of people have no idea who I am. So it's not like it's a major brand or anything. But what I have built again has been easy for me because I just do what I enjoy. I just do what comes naturally. I'm a really good writer. I feel like I can break down complex subjects into simple terms. I'm good at remembering when I didn't know anything, so I can relate to people who currently don't know anything, and can explain things in terms they might be able to understand. That's what I'm good at. So that's what I focus on. So I've been able to do it for 15 years. If I were trying to do something else, if I were trying to do that stage behind me and the flashy Instagram stuff, I'd probably do it for a month or two and say, this is too difficult, get bored and stop. And so, yeah, it's a big learning lesson for me and anybody out there that wants to build a brand. Figure out what your superpower is. Figure out what you're really great at and build your brand around that. If you're really great at video and speaking, then do video. If you're really great at writing, then do writing. If you're really great at coaching people, then start recording your coaching sessions. If you're really great at renovating houses, then build a brand about renovating houses and being a contractor. Whatever it is, build your brand around that.
Yeah, love that. And yeah, be genuine. I think it's really hard to be anybody other than yourself. And so I think, yeah, that's my biggest takeaway from what you've just shared with us. So thank you for that. So let's keep the value going. And I was introduced to you through your partner at Bar Down Investments, Ashley Wilson. Talk about another, intelligent and kind and genuine person. Ashley Wilson is that. She was on this podcast. That episode went out August 22nd, 2023. So if listeners want to listen to that, you have a great story about how you got connected to Ashley and how you and Ashley became partners. Would you mind sharing that story?
Yeah, I'd love to share that story. So it was probably 2016. I went to a conference. I spoke at a conference, and I got off stage, and there was a line of people that wanted to ask me questions, and I answered a bunch of questions. There were still a few people. I think I had to run to the bathroom, or I had to run and do something else. And so an hour later, there was this person that had been following me since I had gotten off stage, and it was Ashley. And she's like, "Can I just talk to you for a few minutes?" And I was like, "Absolutely." And so we chatted. Her husband was there, Kyle. We chatted. My business partner was there. So the four of us were chatting, and we were just talking about what they were working on. They were trying to figure out where to go from. They had been flipping houses also. They were looking to make a change. I was looking to make a change. We talked about maybe we should work together in some capacity. They ended up going into multifamily. I ended up doing something a little bit different, but the four of us kind of kept in touch. Ashley, her husband, my business partner, and I. And when I decided to move into multifamily in 2018-ish, I knew that it wasn't something that I was going to take lightly or just try and do on my own, because when it comes to raising capital, when it comes to being a steward of other people's money, I take that very seriously. And so I basically had this attitude that I'm not going to even think about that unless I'm aligned with somebody that is really knowledgeable, really experienced, and can teach me to the point where I'm comfortable entrusting other people's money to my decisions. And so I reached out to Ashley in 2018, and basically what I said was, I would love to learn multifamily. I know you've been doing it for a couple of years now. Here's what I propose. If you will teach me what you know, if you'll let me follow you around and just kind of observe what you're doing, I'll give you a year of my time and my effort, and I'll give you access to my network and money and skills and anything you need. In return, just let me learn from you for the next year. And I think she thought it was a great deal for her. She had access to a lot of my resources. I obviously thought it was a great deal because I could learn the business. And so for the next year, basically, she taught me the business. And after a year, we did our first deal together. And shortly after that, we realized that we had a lot of great synergies, a lot of complementary skills. The things that she was good at, I wasn't necessarily good at. The things I was good at, she didn't really enjoy doing. But between the two of us, we had the skill set to kind of really efficiently run a large multifamily business together. And so she asked me to join her as her partner in Bar Down Investments in 2020. And we've been partners ever since. But yeah, it really was me knowing that I needed help and recognizing that nobody was going to just teach me for free. And in my case, I was willing to kind of volunteer my time for a year in return for that, and it was a win-win for both of us.
I love that story because it's true to form, it's true to your character, and jives nicely with our previous discussion about building your brand and just bringing value first. If I recall Ashley's story about her getting involved in multifamily, she also did something similar of bringing value to someone else. And so she was able to learn multifamily. You came first to Ashley to bring her value through your network and your resources and your capital. And you found that you had complementary skill sets where one person was lacking, the other person could pick up. And so I just think that's a great story about finding a business partner. Jay, we're getting towards the end of our conversation. I just have a few more questions for you. These are designed to be quick answer questions, but if you have a great story to go along with it, feel free to take some extra time.
I can't answer any questions quickly, as everybody's already figured out by listening to this.
Well, you know what? You just be yourself. That's all I can ask of you. Just be genuine and be yourself. So, Jay, what market are you most excited about and why right now?
What market in terms of location or
Geographical market?
Geographical market. So we've historically been in Texas, and now because the market's softening, we're finding that it's a lot easier to move into new markets because brokers are actually willing to call us back and vendors are willing to call us back, and everybody seems to have time for us now. So we're really excited to move into the Carolinas and the Southeast. So North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia.
What's the best deal you've ever done?
The first one, 4 years, 2 renovations, made every mistake in the book, made $3,000. But for a couple of reasons. One, it was the deal that actually got us off our butts and doing real estate. I like to say that that there are 2 types of people in the real estate world. There are those that have never done a deal and those who have done a lot of deals. There's nobody that's ever done one deal, because people realize if you can do that one deal, you're going to do 2, 5, 10, 50, 100 deals. So just get that first deal done and you're going to build a career. So doing that first deal kind of got me on that path. And second, that deal was probably the hardest deal we've ever done, most mistakes we've ever made. And so it was the biggest learning experience.
What's the worst deal you've ever done?
The worst deal I've ever done. We've only lost money on one deal so far. A deal that we've done. We've had some deals where we've spent a lot of money on due diligence and didn't move forward. But we've only lost money on one deal so far. So I'll say that one. It was a flip in Milwaukee, Wisconsin in 2013. I trusted a partner that I shouldn't have trusted. It was my fault. Don't ever take responsibility for everything you do, and don't ever put all your trust in somebody else.
What's your top tip for finding deals right now?
Network. Now is a time where you can't be introverted. And that's part of the reason why I have Ashley that runs that part of the business, because I am introverted. But yeah, you have to network and you have to build relationships. For in the commercial world, a lot of times those relationships are coming through brokers or big sellers, and the relationship isn't going to be built in a day or a week or even a month. You need to be willing to build relationships over 6 or 12 or 24 months before those deals come. So build relationships and be persistent and follow up and be willing to put in the time.
What's your top tip for raising capital right now?
Honesty. So lot of operators out there, and I'm an LP investor. I'm a limited partner in a lot of deals. And if I talk to any operators right now and I ask them, what's the worst thing that you've been dealing with in this market over the last few years. If they tell me that they don't have any horror stories, or if they tell me that everything's going perfectly, I probably don't want to invest with them, because either one, they're lying to me, or two, if they've really never experienced any adversity, they're going to be in a tough situation the first time they do. And so when my investors come to me, or potential investors come to me and say, "Tell me a horror story," I'm very honest with our horror stories and the situations we're facing. What investors want to hear isn't that you've never had a problem. What they want to hear is that you've figured out how to overcome that problem, and here's how you've communicated with your investors throughout the process, so that they can be confident that when those problems do arise, that you're going to solve them.
Finally, what book, podcast, or YouTube channel or other resource has been helpful to you that you'd like to recommend to others?
Can I recommend my own?
Of course.
Okay. I launched a few months ago a podcast called Drunk Real Estate. It's 4 co-hosts. We're on every week. It's my business partner, Kyle, myself, AJ Osborne, who owns about $300 million worth of self-storage, and Mauricio Raould, who is one of the top securities attorneys in the syndication space. And the 4 of us every week get together and we talk about topics from economics to real estate to politics to education to everything in between, all the things that real estate investors might care about. And we have a glass of wine or a beer while we do it.
Yeah, I mean, titans in the commercial real estate space. And so I honestly can't think of another podcast with more high performing people in commercial real estate. So definitely worth a listen. Finally, if people listen to this, they want to connect with you, they want to learn more about you, where would you like to send people?
jscott.com. That easy. The letter J, SCOTT.com. That'll link you out to everywhere.
Perfect. Jay Scott, this has been an amazing and enlightening conversation. I sincerely appreciate you taking the time out, sharing your time, sharing your expertise with us today.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Great. Listeners, if you enjoyed this conversation, feel free to reach out to either one of us. We would love to connect with you and talk to you about commercial real estate. Until next time, take care.